This is the moment Russia stopped watching and started moving. As of 6:41 a.m. on Thursday, April 24, 2026, NATO's Joint Air Surveillance Network detected 34 Russian Su-35S and Su-57 fighter jets crossing into Syrian airspace from Khmeimim Air Base, not on patrol patterns but on direct southbound headings toward the Iraqi border. At the same moment, 3 Russian Kilo-class submarines that had been stationary in the eastern Mediterranean for 11 days went active and began moving together. In formation, Vladimir Putin had spent 56 days presenting Russia as a responsible diplomatic voice in the Iran conflict, calling for ceasefires, hosting emergency talks, positioning Moscow as the reasonable alternative to American military aggression. That positioning ended at 6:41 a.m. this morning. If you looked at the U.S. Air Force's Combined Air Operations Center at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar right now, you would see something career officers say they have never managed in real time before. Russian aircraft on southbound combat headings, Russian submarines active in the Mediterranean, Iranian airspace still contested, and 2 American carrier groups holding position in the Arabian Sea. Every screen showing a different vector of the same rapidly expanding problem. NATO, already stretched across 2 crisis theaters and absorbing the political cost of vetoing China's ceasefire resolution, has just been blindsided by a Russian military repositioning so fast and so coordinated that the question every general is asking is not what Putin is doing, it is what he is about to do next. In this breakdown, we will show you what those 34 jets are carrying, what the emergency NATO call revealed, what Russia's submarines are signaling with their formation, and why Putin chose this exact morning, 1 hour after London markets open, to make his move. Putin is not shifting jets. He is shifting the entire architecture of this conflict. 8 weeks ago, Vladimir Putin had the most comfortable seat in the world. The plan required almost no effort. Let America spend its military capital fighting Iran. Let the bombing campaign drain Washington's credibility with the global South. Let China absorb the cost of defending Tehran at the UN. And position Russia as the measured voice calling for dialogue, collecting goodwill from every nation tired of the conflict without spending a single Russian life or ruble on the fighting. For 7 weeks, it worked perfectly. Then Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz for 41 minutes and reversed the decision under American military pressure. In those 41 minutes, Saudi Arabia publicly aligned with Washington, 12 nations condemned Tehran simultaneously, and China went silent. The grinding bilateral confrontation Putin had planned to referee from the sidelines suddenly became a rapidly resolving American victory, with a coalition forming around Washington that was leaving less and less space for Russian diplomatic influence. The comfortable position Russia had spent 8 weeks building depended on one assumption, that the conflict would remain unresolved long enough for Moscow's diplomatic patience to become strategically valuable. The Hormuz reversal shattered that assumption. Putin understood one thing immediately. The May 12th Trump-Xi summit would lock the diplomatic positions of the 2 largest economies on Earth into a framework that would be very hard to deviate from afterward. If Russia was not physically present in the theater before that summit, the US-China agreement on Iran would be written without a Russian seat at the table. He gambled that 8 weeks of restraint had earned him the credibility to make a military move without it being read as pure aggression. He is about to find out if that gamble holds. At 6:41 a.m. Qatar time, the NATO radar station at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey picked up the first formation. 12 Su-35S jets crossing the Syrian coast in combat spread. The tight, deliberate spacing of aircraft with a specific destination and timeline, not the loose formation of routine patrol. Then the second group, then the third, 34 aircraft total, all southbound, all at altitudes consistent with offensive operational profiles. For 9 minutes, the Al Udeid Operations Center tracked and verified the contacts without transmitting. Standard protocol requires independent confirmation before a priority alpha alert. At 6:50 a.m., that confirmation came from the USS Eisenhower's long-range tracking systems. The priority alpha alert went out at 6:51 a.m. Pause. While NATO's alert system was activating, the London Stock Exchange, which had opened just 41 minutes earlier, reacted before any government statement existed. Defense sector stocks across Europe jumped an average of 8.3% in 14 minutes. Brent crude moved from 118 to 127.40 in the same window. The explanation was simple and devastating. Professional trading systems monitor military radar data feeds in real time. The market knew about the Russian jets 11 minutes before most NATO governments had been officially notified. While markets were moving, the 3 Russian Kilo-class submarines completed their active sonar handshake. A former U.S. Navy submarine commander told Reuters within the hour, "3 submarines don't handshake simultaneously by accident. Someone told them to do it at the same time." That is a coordinated order from a single command authority. And while the submarines were being tracked, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov appeared without notice at a Moscow podium and delivered a 94-second statement. Russia was conducting defensive redeployment exercises coordinated with Syrian authorities. Russia had informed no NATO member in advance because NATO does not reciprocate transparency in this region. And Russia called on all parties to recognize the Eastern Mediterranean and Persian Gulf approach as a zone of legitimate Russian strategic interest. 94 seconds. 3 sentences, 34 jets, 3 submarines, all coordinated in the same 31-minute window. According to 2 sources with direct knowledge of NATO senior command communications, an emergency North Atlantic Council video conference convened at 7:14 a.m. Brussels time, 33 minutes after the priority alpha alert. We have learned from one person briefed on the session that the Supreme Allied Commander's opening intelligence assessment silenced the room within its first 2 minutes. The 34 jets were carrying a loadout configuration, confirmed by infrared signature analysis from the Eisenhower's tracking systems, consistent with air superiority and ground suppression missions. These aircraft were not positioned to protect Russian assets. They were positioned to contest airspace. Turkey's military representative raised the point nobody wanted to say aloud. The Russian formation's southbound flight paths would bring the jets within 40 nautical miles of U.S. Air Force assets operating over Iraqi airspace within 94 minutes of departure. Not into a confrontation, but close enough that any navigational deviation could produce an incident with consequences no government in that room was prepared to manage. According to this source, the British representative said, "Putin is not asking permission. He is establishing presence. The question is not whether we object. The question is what objecting costs us right now, with these assets already committed elsewhere." The Council's decision transmit a formal clarification request to Moscow while simultaneously ordering every U.S. and NATO air asset in the region to increase defensive posture without making that order public. De-escalation in public. Full defensive readiness in private. We have also learned from a source close to the Kremlin's Foreign Policy Directorate that the repositioning order was signed by Putin personally at 11:47 p.m. Moscow time on April 23rd, 7 hours before the jets crossed into Syrian airspace. It was not a reactive decision. It was a planned operation, timed specifically for the London market open and executed the morning after NATO's formal submission of the Iran-Hormuz evidence to the UN Security Council. Putin was not responding to events. He was scheduling around them. Why did Putin move at this exact moment? Follow the summit calendar, not the military logic. The May 12th Trump-Xi summit will lock the diplomatic positions of the 2 largest economies into a framework that every other government will have to work around. Every major power is currently making its final moves before that window closes. Putin's window to establish Russia as an undeniable factor in any summit conversation closes the moment Trump and Xi sit down. 34 jets and 3 submarines are Russia's application for a seat at that table, delivered in the language of military positioning rather than diplomatic notes. This shifts power in a measurable, immediate way. America can no longer conduct its Iran campaign treating the Eastern Mediterranean as a purely bilateral environment. Every operational decision now requires accounting for Russian aircraft at unknown headings and 3 submarines in coordinated active mode. That is not a complication. It is a functional veto on unilateral American escalation, expressed through geometry rather than words. Sources close to the Israeli defense establishment tell us that Tel Aviv's emergency cabinet assessment described the repositioning as deliberate, calibrated, and reversible on Putin's timeline rather than anyone else's. The assessment concluded that Russia is not preparing to fight America. It is preparing to be too close to ignore when America decides what to do next. What strategists are already calling this in private communications circulating between senior policy institutes is a demonstration of what Russian military doctrine calls escalation management through presence. You do not need to fire a weapon. You need to be positioned so that the other side must factor your potential response into every decision it makes. Putin did not shift the battlefield with explosives. He shifted it with coordinates. Here's the domino effect. Follow every step. If one of those 34 Russian jets deviates into the same airspace as U.S. Air Force assets over Iraq, intentionally or otherwise, rules of engagement on both sides require responses that neither government has publicly pre-authorized. If an unplanned incident occurs, the May 12th summit does not moderate the situation. It becomes the crisis. Every Iran framework discussion, every trade concession, every Taiwan calculation gets consumed by the question of what happened in Iraqi airspace and who bears responsibility. China is watching this with the focused attention of a government that needs the May summit to succeed. Beijing's $400 billion Iran investment depends on a U.S.-China framework that protects Chinese commercial interests inside whatever post-conflict Iran looks like. Putin just introduced a variable Beijing cannot control, and China's silence on the Russian repositioning, now entering its third hour, tells you exactly how uncomfortable that variable is making Beijing. Where is Germany tonight? Berlin's statement at 9:30 a.m. called for immediate de-escalation from all parties, without naming Russia specifically. That soft language from NATO's largest European economy is not diplomatic carefulness. It is an accurate signal of how unprepared the European wing of the alliance is for a conflict that has just acquired a Russian military dimension without any European government voting on whether it was ready for one. This fractures NATO's response framework at its most critical moment. Eastern European members, Poland, the Baltic states, Romania, want an immediate hard response to the repositioning. Western European governments with energy dependencies, domestic political constraints, and no appetite for a NATO-Russia military incident want the clarification request to be enough. That divide does not resolve quietly. It widens every hour Moscow stays silent. Reports from 3 White House correspondents describe a president who posted 7 times on Truth Social between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., calling the repositioning totally expected and being handled, without specifying by whom or how. The National Security Advisor has not appeared at any scheduled briefing since the Priority Alpha alert. Staff have been told to hold all media requests until further notice. The 34 Russian jets and 3 submarines are not just military assets. They are a message written in the only language that cannot be diplomatically qualified or walked back: physical presence. Putin spent 8 weeks building a diplomatic argument that Russia deserved a seat at the table. When that argument stopped producing results fast enough, he stopped making it and started demonstrating the point with coordinates. He wanted to be impossible to ignore when America and China sit down on May 12th. Tonight he is impossible to ignore. The summit is still 18 days away. You can veto a UN resolution. You cannot veto 34 jets in southbound combat formation over Syrian airspace. You can ignore a diplomatic note. You cannot ignore 3 submarines in coordinated active mode on a heading toward a gulf that the world's entire oil supply depends on. Some communications are too physical and too simultaneous to be processed as anything other than exactly what they are. So where do things stand right now? The jets have not crossed into Iraqi airspace. They are holding 40 nautical miles from American assets, close enough to factor into every operational calculation, far enough to avoid triggering formal rules of engagement. The submarines are running at operational depth and will reach the Persian Gulf approach in approximately 31 hours at current speed. NATO's clarification request is with Moscow. Moscow has not responded. And the May 12th clock is ticking. In the next 72 hours, watch for 3 signals. First, whether the jets return to Khmeimim or establish a forward rotation at a Syrian base closer to the Iraqi border. Rotation means permanent presence. Return means the message was sent and Putin is waiting for a reply. Second, Moscow's response or continued silence on NATO's clarification request. Every hour of silence is a deliberate choice. Third, whether the May 12th summit date moves. If either side requests a postponement, Putin's repositioning has already achieved its primary objective before a single further move is made. What cannot be undone is the geometry. 34 jets, 3 submarines, 31 minutes. The battlefield shifted, without bombs, without missiles, without a single shot fired, with coordinates. And coordinates, once established, are very hard to unestablish without someone deciding publicly that they are willing to pay the cost of doing so. Subscribe now. We are tracking the jet rotation patterns, the submarine heading updates, Moscow's NATO response, and every development in the May summit window in real time. If those jets establish a forward base rotation, we go live immediately. Watch every heading. Watch every silence. Stay close. God help us all.